Welcome to the JRPG Canon, podcast where we play a little bit of a video game to learn a little bit about video games. I'm Sam.
I'm Bernard.
And today we're going to play a little bit of Zork, the Great Underground Empire, released by Infocom in 1980. Are you familiar with Zork, Bernard?
I know it's an old-ass text adventure that people played back in the day.
Yeah, that's. I think I know slightly more than that. I remember playing it at some point and promptly getting eaten by a grue, and then referencing in a field next to a White House a lot, and no one knew what I was talking about. And that's about all that I know. Weirdly, I was listening to the Video Game History Hour last week or something. It was a kind of old episode, but they were talking to the library director at MIT, which is where the people who made Zork went to school. And so I learned a lot of stuff about Zork very, very recently, accidentally. So that's as much as I got. But I did learn about a bunch about Zork on purpose, which we can talk about now. So the authors of Zork did a write-up of their time creating Zork in the April 1979 issue of IEEE Computer, not to be confused with IEEE Computer, which is a different thing. Googling this was hard. And the article is a hoot for being both a contemporary source that I always try to find, and also a primary source from the people's own lips. And also as a entry into the Twilight Zone, because this was before the word adventure game got invented in Your Computer magazine in 1981. And so in the article, they refer to these games as computerized fantasy simulation games and keep calling them CFS games the entire time. And boy, howdy, is that a bad name for a game genre. And I'm glad that adventure stuck. So Zork was created, as I said, at MIT between 1977 and 1979 by P. David Lebling, Tim Anderson, Mark S. Blank, and Bruce K. Daniels. And that was back when Anderson, Blank, and Daniels were students and Lebling was a staff member. They directly cite the fact that they got a copy of Adventure, thought it was awesome, but after completely solving the game, as in figuring out how to get every piece of text in the game to show itself, they did that in the first 5 months that they had a copy on MIT computers. They saw the way that the game was deficient and how it had a really low vocabulary, and they thought, hold my beer, and decided that they would make a game that they even called a successor to Adventure. In their write-up, they explained the complications of making natural language input that was able to understand verbs, prepositions, direct objects, and indirect objects, as well as multiple commands in the same input. So something like open the bag, eat the lunch, and drink the water would be understood by Zork when leave building wasn't understood in Adventure. They released the first version of Zork in 1977, but really released is a strong word. They had made their own adventure game. They titled it Zork because that was MIT slang for an unfinished computer thing, like how foo and bar are nowadays. And also were back then. They referenced foo and bar in their write-up. But because there were only like 3 computers in the world at the time, other users would snoop to see what programs are being run, and they found Zork and they spread it around ARPANET. So even though Zork was a temporary name and they were planning on calling it Dungeon, the way that Colossal Cave Adventure was named Adventure, Zork is what the executable was called, and it's what it broke containment as. Which turned out to be a good thing because a few years later they tried to relabel the Fortran port as Dungeon, but TSR, the owners of Dungeons and Dragons, sent them a cease and desist because they said it infringed on their Dungeons and Dragons copyright. So they went back to calling it Zork. This first version of Zork was smaller, both geographically and in computational complexity, but both grew together in huge ways. They talk about how they added a river and they needed a way to get across it, so they then had to simulate water and vehicles and how one would interact with them, and they added a whole bunch of vocabulary just to deal with getting a boat to cross the river. They finished development in 1981, mostly just because they ran out of RAM on the mainframe computers, which was a whopping 1 MB at the time, and less because they were out of ideas or thought that the game was actually finished. Most of the IEEE article is a computer science write up about how they wrote it, which is almost cute in its simplicity because it's like pioneering a lot of things. Like for example, at the end of the article, they talk about where computerized fantasy simulation games could go from there, and they hypothesized that where could be a verb, and so you could have armor and rings, and it's so quaint that they were like envisioning a world where equipment would be possible. They also said that they might make a programming language specifically for making computerized fantasy simulation games. And it's insane to see that game engines were being hypothesized about this early in the history of computer gaming. But it's especially cool to see the different ways they were hypothesizing about new ways to add simulation to the game, because Zork has a time system where each input that's understood by the parser increases the time by 1 tick, and things will happen X ticks in the future from when you do certain things. But Deadline, the game that I brought up during the takeaways for Atelier Marie, which is the first recorded game to have NPC schedules, was made by these same guys a few years after this article was written. So it's cool seeing be like, maybe you could do more with this time thing, and then they invented NPC schedules just a few years later. They also hypothesized about multiple player games, which again is so weird that they're writing gaming think pieces before terms exist, because they hyphenate multiple player games the entire time and they don't come up with the word multiplayer for another 2 or 3 years. It's also cool that they think that multiplayer games might be possible, because one of the most famous things that happened from the adventure game boom of Adventure and Zork is MUDs, which then created MMOs. And so multiplayer games were just a few years down the pike and down the pipe. And they like in the article hypothesize about how like netcode would have to work and how they would have to decide if the game was co-op or competitive. And it's really such an interesting read because it feels like aliens wrote it. They also
down the pike is correct, not
Oh,
down the. You corrected yourself to down the pipe, but it's down the pike.
it felt like I was saying something Sam Almany and not actually real.
You can never know.
It's true. The article ends with them saying if you want a copy of Zork, to mail them a magnetic tape and they'll burn you a copy and mail it back. And they gave their actual physical addresses, which is insane. It's just, like I said, it feels like aliens wrote this article. Another article a couple years later in Byte magazine in December 1980, Lebling wrote another article where he describes CFS games, which he's still trying to make happen. And he says that they are a computerized storybook where instead of the author telling you the story, you have to squeeze it out of him by wit and brute force, which I only bring that up because I thought that was a cool way to talk about adventure games. In the article, he brings up that they successfully did make a Zork engine, because the later microcomputer ports of Zork are not in assembly or machine language, but in an instruction set specifically made to make CFS games. That way, they could make something as complicated as move an item to another room into a small 3-byte function call instead of having to tell the computer everything in ones and zeros. And because they made it into the Zork engine, all it took to port Zork is to make an interpreter for the Zork language, which is why Zork got even more ports than Adventure did, and probably was key to it being the adventure game that everybody remembers. This second article also says that all CFS games known to the author, which they then name 3, count them, 3 games, are fantasy games about solving puzzles and getting treasure. And he hypothesizes that games where it might be possible to use adventure games to tell other kinds of stories, which is
Whoa.
so weird.
You could tell one about a serial murder case. You could tell one about
a police knot,
body snatchers, or a police officer who's also an astronaut. Yeah.
I found one other contemporary article that was a review in Byte magazine, written by Bob Little, and I don't know if it's the first ever recorded instance, but it's the first one I've ever seen of someone saying that save scummers are playing the game wrong. He talks about how the microcomputer port of Zork added the ability to save your game to a blank floppy disk, and while cowards may use it to retain their hard-earned position in the game before making some dangerous move, the true purpose of this is to let you follow the game through to its ultimate end. And I love playing both of these games, or we haven't played Zork yet, but both of these games, seeing like how early certain things were in gaming is amazing to me. Like I was watching a video about the guy who was the first ever dungeon master playing the game that would eventually get worked into being Dungeons and Dragons, and in the first ever game of anything looking like D&D, one of the characters was like, I want to fight that guy, and the DM was like, oh shit, I don't know what to do, rolled a dice and killed his character. So the very first game of D&D had somebody doing something the DM didn't plan for, and a character death. And it's amazing that these things about gaming that have just become tropes over time were there from the very beginning. Speaking of being there from the very beginning, a final thing that I think is really neat about Zork is that they purposely avoided character descriptions and gendered language because they wanted everyone to be able to see themselves in the main character, which continues to prove that the fact that video games are for boys is bullshit, and marketing in the 80s and 90s made it up with, because I don't know, fourth ever adventure game was for the girls, the theys, and the gays, and that's really cool. Video games have been woke from the very beginning. But yeah, I think it's time for us to go get eaten by a Gru.
What if we don't get eaten by a Gru?
I know for a fact I will. I am the little bit I remember about Zork, I'm really, really bad at it. But this rules. I can see why this one is the one that everyone remembers. Adventure was great, but this is like also great.
I mean, there was a lot that I like. I liked the writing in Adventure more, but this was certainly more advanced, and I can see it being like these people iterated on Adventure and gave it an actual title.
Yeah.
Accidentally, as you said.
Yeah, I liked how more advanced the parser was. It feels even more advanced than like Maniac Mansion and other things I had played later. I think it's Maniac Mansion I'm thinking of. I can't remember. I was very little playing it, but I remember it was one of the text adventure games that had graphics. You know what I mean? Before it was like a full adventure game. And I remember fighting with that one so much, where like I was in a room with a door and I was like, open door, go door, use door, exit door, and like I couldn't get anything to work. And this one, the fact that I could say take this and this and this and this and this, but not this, and it grabbed them all, was very, very cool.
Yeah, I haven't played many text adventures. I have watched Strong Bad play the 1980 adventure game Vampire Castle, or Vampire's Castle Adventure, I think it's sometimes called, and the parser in that one was rough.
Yeah.
From what I saw Strong Bad do.
Yeah, I have really, really enjoyed these two text adventure games. We have a couple more text adventure games on the list that L had requested, so I don't know if the next ones will have graphics or not. I think the next one we're playing is Portopia, though, which I know does have graphics, and so I'm excited to do more of it. I'm enjoying these a lot more than I thought. Like after playing Colossal Cave Adventure, I was like, I want more of this.
This is basically just Adventure again, but with more advanced parser, and the writing is good in a subtly different way.
Yeah.
It's less whimsical. However, I found that it had a lot of interesting word choices that I liked, such as I'm trying to think of a specific example, such as the Scratches and blood and
Mhm.
stuff mar the walls.
Yeah.
Lots of good word choices like that. I did think there were some poorly constructed sentences.
Yeah.
And when the
Like,
whole game is text, that's not great.
yeah. Like when it was like you enter a room that the ceiling is too far to be seen from the ground or something like that. It was odd for sure.
And there were some places where I was in my brain, I was being pedantic. I was like, oh, the what that pronoun is referring to is unclear if you're an absolute idiot, which I'm pretending to be because I want to be pedantic about this pronoun.
Mhm.
But, it was so fun. It was good.
Yeah, it was, and I felt like in adventure, I enjoyed a lot of the. Oh, actually, so it kind of reminds me of the differences between a JRPG and a CRPG, where in JRPGs they are almost usually a crafted experience, and you are experiencing the thing that the person wanted you to. But then in CRPGs, it's very systemic, and uh a uh a way that this comes up a lot is like in Final Fantasy games, there will be like, oh, you should be able to have this dolphin do this really crappy mini game so that you can use the dolphin to climb up. And so they make a bespoke part of it for the interaction with the dolphin. But in a CRPG, they make all these systems, and it's like, oh, you can pickpocket anybody, so of course you can pickpocket the final boss and take the MacGuffin and win the game right at the beginning or whatever. And I feel that adventure was a Final Fantasy, and so things like kill dragon with what, your bare hands, yes, and then it succeeds and you kill the dragon, was a bespoke thing that happens all the time. You don't get to do that everywhere, but I feel here you could do a lot of your verbs to everything, which was cool and different. But yeah, Zork rules. I can't wait for Portopia. If you like what you heard today and you're not already subscribed to RPG Book Club, you should check us out wherever you get your podcasts. After subscribing, you can head on over to www.rpgbook.club, where any and all donations will help us offset the cost of running the show. If you donate $1 or more a month, you'll get access to our bonus feed, which has after shows for each episode of the podcast, as well as bonus seasons of the show covering the Tales of series and the Star Ocean series. If you donate $5 or more a month, you'll also get your name shouted out at the end of every episode, a little like this. Shoutouts to Dragon Slayer 19, Freddie Rodriguez, and JFro Prime. And finally, at $20 or more a month, you can make me say a one-sentence shout-out to whatever it is you like, such as El Tantavi, who wants you to check out Aftermath.site, a worker-owned, reader-supported news site covering video games, the internet, and the cultures that surround them. As well as Kildranas, who says to check out Podcasters Assemble. It's a documentary-style, crowdsourced movie hype and rewatch podcast. Every season, podcasters from around the world are assembled to review, reminisce, and riff on a popular franchise. And then shoutouts to Vimk, who says, beside the point. And then shoutouts to It's Clear Time, who says, for you TTRPG nerds, check out Fabula Ultima. I'm not affiliated with the game, I just think it's neat. For the JRPG Canon, I've been Sam.
I'm Bernard.
Go play some games.